The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, hexes, curses, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep from listening to this podcast.
This is the Scream Kings podcast. I'm Nathaniel Darkish.
This is Max George.
And I'm NJ Gallegos.
It'll be dark soon, and they mostly come out at night. Mostly on a podcast. Man, we really can never not have some ridiculous sound effect from one of you two, if not both of you.
It is my calling in life to always do it. I feel dirty when I don't.
My vocal range wasn't up to the alien queen scream today, so I figured I'd let Max go for it.
Oh,
and I think I captured Alien Queen pretty well with what I sounded like.
I mean, you at least brought the queen part of it.
Ah, yes.
Yes, queen, yes.
Yeah. Ugh, gross. Let's talk about something even more gross. Aliens!
And all that goopy stuff that comes with them. Yes. We are talking Aliens from 1986, directed by James Cameron, written by James Cameron, David Giler, I don't know, and Walter Hill. And this is going to be a fun one, guys.
Might I add my favorite movie of all time?
What? Even over Alien?
Yeah, it goes back and forth, to be honest. But right now it's Aliens.
Is it just whatever one you watch more recently?
Pretty much.
Okay, that's fair. All right. So this movie is just such a kind of classic sci-fi horror action romp. So do we want to do a plot summary at all? Is that necessary with this movie? What do you guys think?
I mean, I can sum it up if you guys would like.
Yeah, I think we don't need an exhaustive one by any means. If you haven't seen this movie and you're listening to this podcast, like, what are you doing? But
get
go watch
life
this movie
together.
So yeah, NJ, hit us with your ER doc summary that you would chart in a chart about Alien.
Perfect. Also, listeners, I would like to apologize for my voice. I went to a girls' weekend in Nashville for a 30th birthday, and I cannot hang anymore, so I got a sinus infection. Or it might have been the face hugger that, like, I kind of got attached to my face. Something was in my throat. I mean, it's fine. I have a little chest pain. It's fine. So,
How
Aliens.
About all of the above?
Yeah. I'm sure I have an hour and some odd minutes in me left. It'll be fine.
Perfect.
I mean, what girls' weekend doesn't end with a thing wrapped around your face?
Oh, no. Well, maybe not a lesbian girl weekend.
There were lesbians there, to be fair.
Oh boy.
Good weekend. So Aliens takes place, I think, roughly like 50 some years after the first movie. They
56.
recover... Oh, well, 56 years. They recover, Ripley, and God bless Jonesy. Thank God he's there. And the delightful corporation decides to enlist Ripley to consult on the goings-on LV-426, as they have put some colonists there that are terraforming, and they've lost contact. So they got some Space Marines.
Dun, dun,
Sorry.
dun.
246. Sorry, I'm a dumb fuck. Anyway, go on.
No. Actually, no, you're right. It was 426. I'm just losing my mind.
Whoa!
I'm just losing my mind.
Nerd argument.
I'm just here for sound effects today.
Good. We just
But,
need to
yeah.
get you a soundboard that you can just mash these things.
I don't need a soundboard. My mouth is a soundboard.
We definitely need the. Oh yeah, you got it. You're good.
Okay, continue.
That's pretty much it.
And then a bunch of Space Marines versus a bunch of Xenomorphs, and then Ripley saves a little girl and punches an alien queen in the face with a power loader.
Yep, pretty much.
Wow, you guys make it sound like the greatest movie ever.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sold.
I remember watching this as a child, and my first thought was, "Where's Jonesy?"
That tracks, I feel like.
It does, doesn't it?
So clearly you didn't start at the beginning when she lovingly leaves Jonesy away from the chaos.
I did, but I mean, that was my whole concern was like, just as the movie started, I was like, "Where is Jonesy?" Like the whole thing.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And then you maybe briefly was like, oh, hey, Newt's kind of cool. I relate with this small child, but then also, where's Jonesy?
Right. I'm glad that they didn't bring Jonesy, because that would have been much too much anxiety for me.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. So let's talk about the things we like about this movie. Well, as has been suggested, obviously NJ is super passionate about this movie. I am also super passionate about this movie, but yeah, for me, it did take me some time to kind of come around on this one. Like Alien, first time I saw it, I was just 100%, this is like the greatest thing I've ever seen. Aliens, when I first saw it, I was kind of tepid about it. And I've come around on it, but I can see how a lot of the shifts are very much not the kinds of things that maybe are going to work for all of the people who love Alien. Like, this is a very different movie in a lot of ways.
When did you guys see it? NJ, you mentioned seeing it as a kid, and Nathaniel, how about you?
I mean, I didn't watch those movies until, like, first year of college.
Okay.
So I watched them all kind of back to back, and weirdly enough, even though this would be a very controversial take, like I watched, one, obviously I was like, oh my gosh, amazing, 10 out of 10. I watched number 2, and I was kind of like, eh, and then I watched number 3, and I was like, I like 3 better than 2, and that's again,
Excuse
not...
me.
my thoughts have changed over time.
Here we go.
But yes, but like, I guess really kind of what it boils down to is that it kind of is bringing this very different energy, and it feels very different. Like, this is definitely much more action. We have a military presence here, and so in a lot of ways this movie does feel very different. Again, I think ultimately now that I've had more time to process and watch it a bunch of times and all of that, I really feel like those differences are strengths for the most part. But I wanted the abject terror I felt with the first one, and I didn't get it with the second one in the same way. But I think it is still a very scary movie.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to kind of my response to this film. I love Alien. It's iconic. It's a horror masterpiece. It's up there, I think, with The Thing and some of those incredible horror films. I've seen Aliens recently, probably within the last year or two. It's good. I think what it does really well is it takes sequelitis and cures it in some regard.
Oh yeah, for sure.
NJ, we talk a lot about on the show how, let's take It, for example. The remaster of It was really well done, but then that second chapter lost a lot of the horror because we know who Pennywise is. We're not so scared about Pennywise. This, I think, does a really good job of saying, hey, let's take one xenomorph and make them all over the place. And it ups the risk, it ups the ante. I do not consider this a horror film. I did a rewatch earlier today. Again, I'm probably in the boat of horror fans that doesn't really see this as falling into the horror umbrella. And I know we talk a lot on the show about horror can be different things, and I fully endorse that. But I think a lot of the things that make a horror movie horror are lacking in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely my kind of initial response too, is that, in the first film, when I saw it, it was like, oh my gosh, it's the perfect killing machine. It kills everybody. It literally takes being blasted out of a spaceship to kill this thing, right? And then with this one, it very much felt like a kind of a shift, right? Where it's suddenly, gunning down xenomorphs left and right. And that took away a lot of that kind of enthusiasm that I had with this one. But, yeah, as time has gone on and I've kind of gotten nerdily just deeper and deeper into how xenomorphs work and all of the extended universe lore, all of that, because of course I'm deep into that. I really appreciate what this one does, and I really love the ways that it breaks from that sequelitis, but also does really interesting things to build on the universe. And I think, yes, I'm not as scared watching this movie, but there are moments where I do feel scared. But I can definitely see where, like, this also feels very much like, hey, kind of like a any other sort of military sci-fi where the horror feels less present, because we have beefy people with guns that are dealing with a lot of the issues. And so the horror plays out in a very different kind of way. And so I think because it's a different kind of horror, it maybe doesn't check the same sort of horror boxes for all viewers. And so I had to kind of find what made this horrific to me. And I think it's just not checking those same boxes like I experienced on my first few watches for you, Max.
Did you have a traumatic experience with Pride and Prejudice?
Yeah, so what I was getting at is, you talk about that you found the horror in this film, and it might not strike people as horror because of the military kind of background. So are then we applying that lens to all movies? So if I have a traumatic experience and I resonate with that in, say, Pride and Prejudice or Willy Wonka, does that make that film a horror movie?
Ooh.
So
thought-provoking.
That is, and we will revisit this after we get into the movie. Let's stew on this, and then we'll cover the rest of Aliens. We'll come back to this topic because I think this is a great point, and I think at the end of the day, what we're probably going to land on is something along the lines of what is horror to one person may not be horror to another, and that's okay, but definitely we'll dig into this more and consider some examples that maybe are in more the sci-fi realm, but I also do have my thoughts on Willy Wonka as a horror movie because it is terrifying.
I mean, the tunnel scene will stick with millennials until we die.
Millennials, Gen X. I mean, really, it just kind of scarred like 2 or 3 generations in a row. Like,
very true, very true.
The trauma is real.
NJ, I want you to shut us up and tell us everything that you love about this film, because it is a good movie. We can't say that it's not.
Oh, so, how do I count the ways in which Aliens is a wonderful cinematic masterpiece? So, obviously, you have to start with Ripley. I mean, I'm always for women-centric horror, and she is an absolute badass. She's just...
She may be like my favorite horror heroine of all time.
Yeah, I would argue she's like the best final girl, honestly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because, she's competent. They hand her a gun. She's like, all right, how do I fire this? How do I shoot this grenade? Like, let's go. But she's also, she puts Newt first. Like, she wants to protect Newt, and obviously some of that's with her daughter, the daughter that she unfortunately left behind that passed away while all of this, what was it, 56 years, was it, Nathaniel, was that?
Yes.
56 years passed, which I did like that, because it kind of humanizes her a little bit, that they added that.
For sure.
Yeah, so Ripley, bam. I would argue that this movie has probably two of the scariest scenes to me that I have ever seen. So the part in the medical lab where what's that douchebag lets the face hugger out.
Burke,
yeah, that I try not to even think of his name because he's such a douche.
Yeah, Paul Reiser really captures douche in this. Like,
He nailed it.
yeah.
So that part creeped me out absolutely, just because, you don't know where it is. You hear it, shuffling around. That part just absolutely makes my skin crawl. And then the scene where Ripley stumbles upon the egg chamber, and you see just this, like, the scope of how large and terrifying the queen is. You see, like, hundreds of eggs. And it's just so ominously quiet. Ugh. It gets me every single time.
Yeah, I agree, especially with that. I mean, both of those scenes are terrifying. With that second scene, what I love about that is it kind of is dipping back into that cosmic terror that we got little glimpses of in that first film, right? Like, the thing that I think, where I found the horror in this, that I kind of alluded to, is things like that, where we kind of realize the scope of just how vast and dangerous and infinite, essentially, the threat is of the xenomorphs. And so I love that scene because, to me, that scene feels like finding a temple to Cthulhu with, and like it has that same kind of very Lovecraftian vibe in terms of just like, oh, this is so big and bad and way worse than I ever could even conceive of. And having it with that sort of like mind-bogglingly awful lens is what made it really kind of terrifying to me. And so that was really kind of what I have attached to, is that scene in particular really just like chills me.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to disagree, but I feel like that's an extrapolation a little bit, because I see that scene, and with my biology background, it's like, yeah, the aliens are reproducing. This makes sense. Mm-hmm. So again, I think we're coming to another point in this film where you can interpret it with that Lovecraftian viewpoint, or look at it from like a biological standpoint and be like, yeah, is it scary? Sure. It's still science, though.
And what I like is that it does kind of have both of those things present, right? And to me, I think, the realization there, when she goes into that egg chamber is, oh my gosh, this is enough xenomorphs to kill every human on every planet that humans have spread out among the galaxy to. Like, that is, I think, the level of weight of that scene to me. And yeah, like, you're right. Like, it's just the animal. It's an animal fulfilling its biological imperative, and it like feels like a real animal working how it does. It feels kind of like an ant colony or things like that, but still has its own uniqueness. But I think just Ripley going, these things destroyed this colony, and that's awful. But that is just like that is tiny potatoes compared to what they could do.
True. Question, I don't know if you know this from like your expanded universe, whatnot, but do they like reproduce like asexually, or is there like a drone alien that fertilizes the eggs, or like, you guys know?
Yes, I do know. So there are okay, to the best of my remembrance, it is that basically the like fertilization process essentially comes from the implantation of the embryo into the human body. Like that's kind of what allows, or to whatever host body it is. That's kind of what allows it to have a full life in it. So that's kind of what ties it together to the best of my, which is like getting into really weird, kind of abstract. That doesn't really fit with how we understand biology. But like basically the fertilization process isn't truly complete until it's been implanted in a host.
Okay.
And that's why they take on attributes of the host when they burst forth, with like the Pred Alien and the Alien versus Predator movie or things like that, where we get some of these kind of weird sideways takes on what a xenomorph can be.
And that is rooted in some biology as well. We see several invertebrates or insects, kind of take over a host and implant their eggs in the host until the host dies and becomes really a husk for the replicated animal. They're terrifying and gross. So, anyway, that's my zoology degree coming in handy, guys.
Heck yes. Well, and part of what I love about this movie is that we're given such an interesting biology where we can make those kind of connections to it's like an ant colony in certain ways, and it's also like those kind of planting eggs in a host that then burst out. But there's also things about it that obviously kind of defy any logical life cycle that makes sense to us. The facehugger kind of being almost a separate organism in that process is really weird. Yeah. And so I love that we kind of get this blend of grounded in real biology, but then also this hey, acid blood facehuggers kind of things that don't really make sense to how we understand things, but that is also. But I like that the character's approach to looking at that isn't, oh, well, this makes perfect scientific sense. They look at them and go, holy crap, that's terrifying and doesn't make any sense. We have to study this. Or have to weaponize it. Or we have to burn it with fire. We have to nuke it from orbit.
By the way, Max, I love when you talk science to me. It gets me going.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
So what else do we like about the film? I think in our notes, we do talk about it's kind of a very natural progression from the first film. I appreciate that it's 56 years. A lot of times I think in sequels where it's 6 months later, 1 year later. And this allows ample time for a lot to develop and the world changes. We're not just kind of forced to assume that things rapidly shift.
Yeah, and I agree because I love that we get to go back to the planet, that they visited in Alien, and it's very different now. I love seeing that things have changed, and one of my favorite story elements that is present here, that is kind of an interesting natural progression, is that we get glimpses of just how awful and just awful and massive Weyland-Yutani is, right, in Alien. But then when we see them in this film, we get to get a better appreciation for the scope of what they are and how far they're willing to go to just get assets, right? A colony of people who are terraforming this planet for us are all dead. Meh. That's a tiny cost compared to what we could make off of weaponizing xenomorphs. That kind of thing, and just the ways that it has affected the culture in all of these societies is really interesting. Weyland-Yutani Corporation is this terrifying, almost Lovecraftian monster of its own, just because it's so vast and so powerful in the galaxy.
They're like the Comcast of the Alien universe.
Oh no!
Whoa. I mean, Wayland Yutani certainly kills people, but are they really Comcast bad?
To juxtapose that, though, I think what is refreshing of this film is we do have that kind of big corporate world wanting to, weaponize a xenomorph. That sounds like a country I know of that we live in. But then you have Ripley, who is just filled with empathy. She's a competent human being. She kind of sees through the bullshit, and this movie really makes you root for her. Very similar to Alien. She's not an idiot. They don't make her out to be a final girl, even if she is one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like dumb luck that she survives. It's, she is smart, she sees problems, and sometimes is the only one that is, saying, this is dumb, let's not do this. But I like that they give her interesting foil characters in this one, too, right? That we have Bishop and we have Hicks, who both have their own interesting competencies that kind of complement Ripley, but are in very different areas. And then we have Newt, who is, needing Ripley, and Ripley grows to need her. Like, I love that we have, kind of all four of these characters that really play off of each other in really interesting, dynamic ways. And I love that, going back to just, Ripley being the best, because of course she is. Yeah, like, with her empathy and her competency, like, I love that the thing that ultimately allows her to be victorious is the way that Wayland Yutani screwed her over previously. That basically they blame her for the loss of the Nostromo. They make it so she can't even get any real jobs. The only thing that she can do is operate power lifters. And it's like kind of a way to like almost humiliate her, because of course it's Wayland Yutani punishing someone for losing them money. And then when it comes down to it, she has this skill set and beats the freaking alien queen using the thing that, was the, dumb, useless labor skill, essentially, that she had. That they put so little stock in. They're like, oh, well, we'll let her have that job. And that's how she wins. Like, it's so satisfying to have her skills come out on top, even when it's like, hey, basically, I can operate a futuristic forklift.
Which I have to argue is probably like the absolute best scene ever, whenever the door opens and she's in the loader. And just badass, and get away from her, you bitch. Gets me every time. Every time.
Yeah, that is definitely a stand-up and cheer moment.
That's why I named my Bronco Ripley. She's yellow and badass.
Nice.
Like the loader. Yeah.
NJ, how about you talk to us about how smart the xenomorphs are compared to the first one? Because I do think they kind of take a shift here in this film.
Because, in the first one, they kind of hint at it. They're using the duck system, or the one xenomorph's using the duck system and whatnot. But in this one, I mean, they really display how intelligent they are. Going back into the egg chamber scene, Ripley has that flamethrower, and she's essentially, miming to the queen, like, hey, you call off your guards, these other xenomorphs that are going to attack, or else I'm going to just waste all of these eggs. And then, the queen's like, all right, like, back off, let's go. And then, Ripley's like, fuck you, and just devastates all the eggs, which is fantastic. God bless her. And then the part where they're running away, her and Newt, and they're in the lift, and you see the queen, like, watch how she uses the lift, and then she gets in the one next to it and then goes up. Like, they're smart as hell. It's very scary. And then even too, they did mention whenever they're like, oh, they cut the lights, they cut the power, like, they're smart enough to be able to do that,
Mm-hmm. And we also get to see, kind of some of the pack hunting and how they're herding people to keep them alive, which is really cool. They're not just killing machines. That are smart enough to recognize, like, oh no, we're gonna herd these people and get them right where we want them, so we can use them to get some face huggers some action.
Face hugger action.
That's my kind of night.
But I'm bump.
Oh boy.
I love this so much. And I also think that this movie probably has some of the best quotes ever. Most of them are Bill Paxton Hudson.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I read somewhere that a lot of his lines he kind of ad-libbed too. Which is
Game
even
over,
better.
man. Game over.
Oh, I laughed so hard at the part where, why don't you just make her in charge, man? And Newt just salutes to him.
Yeah, there's just so many like wonderful little moments, and along those lines, like some of these like fun little like very quotable lines really also do a lot to kind of flesh out a lot of these side characters. Like all of these people, like, yes, some of them are very cartoonish, but all of these Marines do feel like people with backstories. They feel very, much like they already have rapport with each other. I love the exchange between Vasquez and Hudson, where Hudson's just like, "Hey Vasquez, you ever been mistaken for a man? No, have you?" Like,
boom, gotcha.
Yeah, just like so many little things like that are just so fun. And then also just like Ripley just like being super pissed off at Wayland Yutani early on. Just oh, did IQs like dramatic or rapidly drop during my time away? So whatever that line is.
Oh yeah.
I was close. But yeah, that line is just like just so many great zingers. But then also like I just love that there are like these little interesting like character beats where even like that I don't know, corporal or whatever his rank is, that like as they're like dropping, oh well, how many drops have you done? 38. 36 simulated. This is my second real drop, and you're like, oh, okay, like things like that really kind of just do a lot to sort of, I don't know, flesh out these characters. Like instantly, you kind of get a feel for who this person is, and all that. But and also like I don't know, just the ways that these characters are written. Like I want to talk about Burke being just the biggest douche canoe on the planet, because like he's like the perfect douchey villain, right? Like the fact that he always is just being so fake sweet with Ripley, like, oh, I'm so sorry, kiddo. He keeps calling her kiddo.
It's very patronizing.
Yeah, but he's doing it in a way where he's just like, oh yeah, look, we're so chummy. Oh man, you just want to punch him right in the throat. Like among fictional characters, he is like at the top of that list of most punchable throats in all of film.
It's definitely on a BuzzFeed article somewhere.
If not, it should be. Hit me up, BuzzFeed.
He's like totally, my dad will sue you. That's totally him.
And like that dude's got range because like he's super likable in Stranger Things and lots of other stuff. I mean, obviously people think of Paul Reiser for more than just Aliens and Stranger Things, but that's where my brain just went.
Yeah, isn't he on God, is it Mad About You or something?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, just like very, very fun, very charismatic, and then sometimes he can also just be the biggest douche ever.
I see. That's the thing. I mean, he got murdered, thank God. But I want to know, like, what did they do with Jonesy?
Yeah, there should have been
the biggest question.
There should be a special director's cut just for you that is, her giving Jonesy to a child who will be protected by this great cat.
Aliens, the Jonesy story.
You know
I mean,
what?
there
I'm
is
gonna
a
write a
kid's book.
fanfic. I'm writing a fanfic about Jonesy.
Please do, please do.
There is a real kids book that I definitely need to buy for my children about Jonesy.
I should buy that for my nieces. They'll like that.
Yes, you should. Last big thing I want to talk about as far as the good, before we get into some things that maybe didn't work as well for all of us. Just creature design and practical effects. Obviously, there's a few clunky bits because, it's an older movie. But, few things are as effective as looking at a xenomorph and the xenomorph queen.
So true.
Oh my gosh.
So true.
Practical effects, the puppetry, the people in suits, the just, tangible, practical everything is just so freaking good. Oh my gosh, this movie is just gorgeous.
Yeah, even the technology feels very rooted in reality. Even, they're in space and yada yada. But if the Alien franchise does anything well, it is, the set design and the practical effects.
And yeah, and along those lines, I love that what we're seeing isn't super glossy. It's basically space truckers in the first one, and then with this, it's military. And so, it's form over function, or sorry, it's function over form. It's this is practical, usable stuff. It's not the super gazillionaire version of the technology, and we get teeny glimpses of that in some of the special boardrooms and stuff at the beginning of the movie, where we see kind of the glossier, prettier versions of some of this technology. But I love that it really does feel like, hey, this is the military budget version of the kinds of things that you'll see that space travel. It's not pretty, but it works.
Did you notice how the ship, the Silico ship, kind of looks like a machine gun whenever it's going through space?
Yeah.
I like that.
I don't.
The car thing, the Batmobile, I don't know, the armored thing. I need that for parallel parking. I need that so badly.
Don't we all?
I have to have my wife do it. I'm just listen, I grew up in a cow town. If there's parallel parking, I'm not going, so you just do it.
The only thing I failed on my driver's test was parallel parking, so I get it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing in my trauma.
Trauma from my past.
Dun, dun, dun.
All right. Should we talk about some things that maybe don't work as well in this movie?
The one thing I noticed that it took me a little bit out of the movie was just some of the special effects didn't hold up very well.
Sure.
Mostly the ones where it's the ship is flying against you can tell it's a green screen or something, and they just did it very badly. Or whenever Ripley is in the loader the very first time, demonstrating what she can do, it just looks very grainy and, I don't know, cheesy, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot less smooth than the fight, for sure. Which is funny because the whole point of that scene is her showing off, yeah, I'm super competent too. Step off, guys, and and so it's just it is kind of funny that it actually kind of comes across as a lot clunkier than I think they're intending.
I guess at least it worked for the final moment though, because I don't notice anything bad about that at all. So
the biggest thing for me is honestly, kind of what I referred to that especially on my first viewing of this movie, the tonal shift to kind of military sci-fi action really was jarring for me. Again, I'm on board with it now, but I guess just Alien and Aliens feel very, very different, and I think that is going to throw some people totally off. And I see why some people think Aliens is the bee's knees over Alien. Man, I just sound I'm just so old sometimes.
The bee's knees.
See, I'm used to doing this on purpose to teenagers to make them cringe, and it just has started making its way into my speech unironically.
I love it. Keep it up, Mr. Nathaniel.
But yeah, you know,
Dad.
Nerd.
But yeah, so that tonal shift definitely, 19-year-old me was not on board with that. And yeah, along those lines, xenomorphs just do feel a fair bit less dangerous and scary when you can see 50 of them, 100 of them get gunned down in a movie. When, one freaking killed everybody in the first go around.
Yeah, that's fair. And they didn't really have any weapons in the first one either, so that was part of the problem. But now they got badass weapons.
Pew pew.
Yep, they get all the pew pews.
There's my sounding board.
Wait! You watched the pew pew cut?
Pew 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 pew. There it is again.
It's very Buck Rogers as they're running around with their little laser guns. Pew 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 pew.
Don't you hurt my eggs, you bad boy.
Oh, no. This is why you're on the show, NJ, for that moment.
This is why you asked me to join you. Thank you.
Forever and always.
You have now fulfilled the prophecy.
Yes. The triad is complete.
The last thing for me was, I talked about this actually last episode. I don't love dream sequences, and having that kind of dream sequence near the beginning when she's, wakes up in the hospital, and then it goes into, chest burster, and then she wakes up, was really kind of confusing and jarring in this very frustrating way, especially because a lot of that information that we get about, how much time has passed and what Weyland Yutani's doing and all of that stuff is not, it comes to us during the dream. And then, I think, we're supposed to know that information is still good, even though the end of that sequence was chestburster. So, dream sequences are dumb and I hate them, especially in this case.
We need a dream sequence of what Jonesy's doing.
Yes.
And Jonesy's back.
Ooh, we could have one where he's like chasing whenever the chest burster comes out right away, and he just chases it and kills it, just like whatever.
Yeah, I just want Jonesy to go, hardcore on all the xenomorphs.
I bet Cat Bane could do it.
Miles might be able to do it too. They could team up.
Oh, totally. Not to derail the conversation, but it's Cat Bane's 2nd birthday today.
Happy birthday, Bane!
He doesn't care that you said that, but thank you.
Oh, he does. I can feel it. All right.
All right. You guys want to argue about if this is horror sci-fi now?
Do you also want to participate in the argument?
Yes, I would. I would love to.
Okay.
So I alluded to this at the beginning of the episode, everyone, and I apologize. This is probably a soapbox that I need to dismantle. Yeah, so I love this film. I really enjoy it. I don't consider it horror whatsoever. I do think it falls much more in the category of a sci-fi film. And this kind of brought up a few different things. Nathaniel, you were talking earlier on the show. We talked about Pride and Prejudice and Willy Wonka and all of that. Like, people, of course, horror is subjective. So if you have a traumatic event in your life that, you resonate with, and what comes to mind is my daughter saw the scene in The Fellowship of the Ring where Boromir dies, and the creepy orc with, like, the white hand paint on his face.
And the Ariana Grande hair?
Yeah, exactly. It terrified her to death. So I'm sure from here on out, she's going to think of Lord of the Rings and be like, I don't want to watch that. It scares me. So does that now make Lord of the Rings a horror film in general because it scared somebody? does it make it a horror film because she interpreted it to be horror, or does it remain a fantasy film that scared somebody?
So,
and I don't want you to pull your literary knowledge on me. I want this to be like a let's put our degrees aside and say, what do we think? Because the normal person is not going to have the English background that you do. They're not going to be able to dissect a diatribe about what is horror and what is not horror, right?
Yeah, but okay.
You're just taking him out at the knees. You're just like, get wrecked, Nathaniel.
Yeah, you're like, hey, but also like all of your knowledge and expertise is invalid here. No, that's like setting you up with tell me about biology, but also don't use your degree. No, okay. Here's my thought. So, obviously, at the end of the day, it really is a subjective experience. Is something horrifying? Well, I mean, there are plenty of movies that I think we can, objectively say that is a horror movie that aren't scary, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, to me, horror isn't necessarily about, do I feel scared by this movie or, this book or whatever. I think horror is about kind of the intention of what sort of feelings are being evoked. And I am going to pull a little.
No, go ahead. I was mostly just harassing you.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to go to the king of horror, Stephen King. In his book On Writing, he talks about horror as basically he defines it into kind of three major categories. He talks about the horror, the terror, and the gross out. And so basically, horror is kind of this feeling of seeing something that is upsetting, that frightens you. Terror is kind of more of the anticipation. It's the it's the unknowing, or not knowing what's going to happen. Sort of feeling of suspense or dread. And then the last thing is the gross out. So basically, is it goopy and gross? And so essentially, I think at least when I'm thinking of horror, is it kind of goes down to, does it contain one of those three major elements? And so to me, I think yes, Aliens has these things present. It does have horror, terror, and gross out in all present. But yeah, like I think the level of intensity of that is relatively tame in comparison to the first film.
So are you saying that a movie needs to contain all three of those to be considered a horror film?
No.
Okay.
I think as long as one of those is kind of one of the major intentions of the film, then it is a horror film.
So
But that said, like, that does really open up a lot of stuff. And so I think at the end of the day, we can also kind of ask the question, how present is this? And so, with some of the things that that have been brought up, I would say it can be safe to categorize certain movies as, say science fiction or fantasy with elements of horror present, which is not abnormal to encounter. We're going to see elements of horror in most things. You'll see elements of horror in romantic comedies. But the kind of the difference is, like, how much makes it horror. And I think that's ultimately kind of what we're going to be looking at is, for horror to be one of the major categories that we're looking at when we're looking at a piece of entertainment. Is this a big enough piece of the pie to then say that horror is one of the genres that we would list tied to it? So, Alien, it's like right down the middle sci-fi horror, right? For Aliens, for me, it's kind of action and sci-fi and horror. I would say action and sci-fi are probably 70% and horror is 30. So, it's like 35, 35, 30. But yeah, like, your experience watching it probably put the horror down to maybe 10, right?
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying here. I think, though, as horror movie podcasters, where is the line that we have to draw when we consider a film horror or not horror? Because you bring up a good point that all films are going to have some element of horror, right? The terror, if we look at terror as anticipation, we look at horror as the spooky, and then gross out. I have a list of a bunch of what we would consider sci-fi films that I see more closely resembling Aliens than I do anything related to horror. Close Encounters of a Third Kind. Is it sci-fi or is it horror?
I mean, I think it's definitely, more science fiction, but I think that there are a lot of really strong horror elements to it. I would say, it's part of the pie.
I mean, there's that legalese again here of it's sci-fi, but it also is horror. I want that definition.
And I think at the end of the day, it's not possible to have that.
Then what are we doing on this podcast? We're a horror movie podcast. We have to have something.
Well, I mean, I guess, pure and simple. If we want it to be, objective, look at IMDb, look at the listed genres. If one of the top 3 things says horror, it's horror. If it's not, it's not. Aliens, yeah, it's like the 3rd thing it lists. But when it comes to Close Encounters, that's probably maybe 4th or 5th. But yeah, I think that's kind of the thing. And yeah, to me, yeah, Close Encounters feels like a horror movie because the first time I watched it, it really the thing that stuck with me was kind of this the scarier moments early on in the film. But there's also that sense of wonder too, right? And so yeah, in many ways Close Encounters doesn't feel the same. But, talking Annihilation, yeah, there's some of this sense of wonder in science fiction, but it's also really freaking ball scary.
Okay, so again, for me, Gravity, physics aside, that terrified the shit out of me. It had the terror and it had the horror. Perhaps not the gross out per se, but I don't think anyone in their right mind would say Gravity is a horror film.
It has horror elements. How about that?
Yeah, but I agree. Gravity isn't a horror film.
So would we? I think, would we call ourselves a horror elements podcast? I don't know.
It sounds kind of badass.
I'm having this little moment of
existential crisis.
Yeah, a little bit, because we are so focused on horror movies, and I would even challenge the two of you as horror authors. How do you make very plain that your books don't come off sci-fi? What elements are you not going to include to guarantee that your books can be published under the horror genre? Because, NJ, your book is not science fiction at all, and Nathaniel, I've read a lot of your stuff, and it's not science fiction at all either. So what differentiates that horror genre specifically? Does that make sense? Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
No, I think that's a great question. And to that, I would reply that at the end of the day, horror is a marketing label. It comes down to
that's a good point.
What is going to get certain consumers to connect with us, right? And so, especially in the book world, there are phases where tons of horror novels are published as thrillers, as supernatural thrillers. They won't say the word horror, but it's horror, and so it really just boils down to it's a marketing term. It's the kind of thing where we can kind of go, hey, sometimes the powers that be are going to call something horror, and other times call something not horror. And I think what it boils down to is what was our experience with it. And I love that we're able to have this discussion where 2 out of the 3 of us are like, oh my gosh, yes, this is a horror movie, and you're like, not so much, because again, especially because I was in your boat the first time I watched that. I was like, that wasn't that scary, and 2, that it does kind of open up this thing where I think sometimes we are going to cover stuff that is just horror adjacent, or will be horror-ish, maybe have some strong horror elements that we want to highlight, and so yeah, we may occasionally dip our toes in stuff that might not be always super conventional, everyone is on board with this being horror. but I mean, yeah, along those lines, I've had people who tell me Alien isn't a horror movie, and I laugh because it's terrifying.
To clarify, I'm not saying we can't talk about horror adjacent things at all. I love when we kind of go out of the box.
Yeah.
I think you're still skirting around the issue a little bit, Nathaniel, only because I've read your literature, and it would not be considered thriller. I do not look at your literature and say, Nathaniel wrote a thriller book. You write horror.
Well, okay, I'll take the book that I have right now. It is a ghost story. But at the end of the day, it is also kind of a family drama. And honestly, there are definitely publishers who would sell this as a family drama with supernatural elements instead of it being a horror book. And I think it's a horror book. I feel like it's a horror book. But, at the end of the day, like, it does kind of just boil down to who is the one who's packaging it and who is the audience that the people who are in charge of trying to make money want to think that this item can connect with. So, but like, I agree. Like, I think, most things that we're talking about are kind of black and white. Like, yeah, that's a horror thing. But it is really hard to define. I don't think there is really like one definitive answer, unfortunately.
NJ, what do you think?
So,
yeah, what's going through your head?
So I'm not going to be nearly as eloquent about this, but in my mind, I see like Alien and Aliens almost as like a creature feature. Like, you have an antagonist that's absolutely terrifying. And it kind of reminds me, I guess, I don't know, like, it's similar to, like, I guess, like Frankenstein or Dracula or something. There's like something that the heroes are going up against that's overpowered, terrifying, and that's that to me, I guess. So in my mind, that's what makes it a horror.
Yeah, well,
but then it's a slippery slope, because then, I mean, you have like Godzilla, you have stuff like that, So again,
and I would argue Godzilla is absolutely a horror movie.
And see, I would say it's not.
Yeah, well, and I think some of that boils down to this kind of the cultural feel that we have for these things too, right? Like, I think even xenomorphs become less scary because they have become part of the pop culture. And so, you can get a xenomorph plushie and it doesn't feel as scary. And so, yeah, like Godzilla, I have a Godzilla plushie in my house. It's adorable. But I think the intention is really trying to put this feeling of terror into the people who are watching it. Even if it maybe doesn't really land, especially with a modern audience. Like, a lot of Godzilla feels kind of silly. Except for Godzilla -1, but I already talked about that way too much.
well, I guess agree to disagree.
But yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is like some really satisfying answer we can come to. I think that definition that Stephen King threw out there is about as close as we can get. But then at the end of the day, yeah, that still really just gives more angles to argue.
Yeah, I think it is a good starting point, but you can apply those three categories to anything, and then it becomes horror. So, I don't know. I'm not appeased, but I'll shut up for the sake of our listeners.
And you don't have to be appeased. I love that this can be an ongoing argument where we can continue to look at this and go, I don't know, but is this horror? Is Willy Wonka horror? Because I think, that one scene absolutely was meant to terrify the audience. What else could it have possibly been?
Right.
But at the end of the day, like, it's mostly not that. But that one scene is real rough, especially for a 5-year-old.
So last thing I want to kind of bring up real fast, and I'm not going to make it this into a diatribe, but you were talking about horror being essentially a marketing term. So yes. My kind of hesitancy with that is a marketing term is going to shift based on the zeitgeist that it requires. Yeah. So one day is, It or Texas Chainsaw Massacre not going to be horror because it no longer fits in what is societally deemed to be horror?
I think it usually kind of goes in the opposite direction, where things that were considered horror in the past tend to stay within that category, but then the categories may be expanded over time or shift. But
engage in the thought experiment here. If we're going to use horror as a marketing term, that's going to change, because true crime has kind of developed its own type of genre outside of horror. So why can't Texas Chainsaw develop a new type of genre? Maybe it's a period piece.
A satire.
Yeah. And people will not look at it as horror anymore. If we take the term horror and use it as a marketing tool.
Great question.
Because I think that is at the heart of my question. What makes a piece of art inherently horror? Does that make sense? Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I agree with you, will never not be horror. But why?
Okay, yeah. And I'll actually give it an example that sort of fits within what you're saying. That, especially to a modern audience, the Universal horror movies, from the 30s and 40s, don't feel like horror movies. They feel like melodramas usually. They don't feel very horrific at all. And I would say most people wouldn't even hesitate to show a lot of those movies to small children, and just go like, oh yeah, like this is just like a fun little they treat it kind of more like a fun fantasy romp rather than a horror film.
Sure.
And yeah, so like, I think at the end of the day, it is going to shift and change. I think it should shift and change. And sometimes it's going to be in really stupid ways. Like I said, basically like through the 90s and early aughts, a lot of horror books, like there stopped being horror sections in a lot of bookstores, and they would just go, oh, these are our thrillers, and you're like, hey, where's the spooky books? And like, I don't know. Well, some of them are in literary fiction, and some are in sci-fi fantasy, and some of them are in our thriller and suspense section. And you're like, but it's not really any of those things, is it? Yeah. Sure, it's kind of checking those boxes too, but there's a certain feel, and yeah, like it's trying to explain like what happiness feels like, right? It's hard to explain. But I know when I feel it. But my feeling of it is going to be a little different than your feeling of it.
Yeah, true.
That was beautiful.
Horror is happiness, guys. Horror is happiness.
Horror is happiness, no matter how you define it.
Yes.
Coexist.
We need to make some sort of horror pun with coexist.
Yeah.
And then merchandise it.
Wahaha. All right. Speaking of horror, how are you guys staying spooky?
Wait, we haven't done scores yet.
Oh my gosh, you're right. I got so consumed. Oh my goodness. Yeah, hit it.
Screams. I give this movie a 7.5, mostly from that abject terror I feel at the Lovecraftian scariness. It really gets under my skin.
I gave it a 4. I'm not very scared by aliens at all. Xenomorphs are spooky inherently, and I think they would scare people. I wouldn't show this to my daughter, but I wasn't scared.
I wasn't scared at all.
No way, Jose.
I give it a 9. I find pretty much every part of the life cycle of a xenomorph terrifying. I think the egg is really disgusting. I don't like the face hugger. I think it's almost like a...
Wait, you don't like eggs with lips?
I do not, no.
That's my number one porn search, is eggs with lips. Yikes.
Oh, boy.
I had to. We had to mention it at least once, guys.
You did. It's contractually obligated.
It is. It's in my Scream Kings
porn at least once.
Contract. It's, Article 3.
Mention porn once. I find face huggers to be absolutely terrifying, just because it's almost like a a sexual assault like allegory, which I mean just terrifies the living shit out of me. You know, I mean you're being impregnated essentially with this thing that then kills you. And then just xenomorphs themselves are absolutely terrifying. I mean, they have acid for blood, they got the tiny little mouth and all that, so I give it a 9.
Excellent. Crowns. I give this movie a 9.5. Again, once upon a time, I might have given it a 7 or 8. But man, this movie just really works for me. Honestly, it would be even closer to a 10 if it didn't have that stupid dream sequence in it.
I'll help you out, Nathaniel, and I gave it a 7. It's good. I like this movie. I'll watch it again, but I'm not, horny for aliens, so.
But they're horny for you.
Oh, they are. I give it a 10 because I am horny for aliens.
Is this your first 10, NJ?
It is.
Ooh, celebrate.
Woohoo.
There you go. That wasn't even me. That was NJ.
It felt right,
It
but
did.
also weird. Sorry.
Woohoo! There you go.
Yeah, don't get us shut down by Cool in the Game, though. Can't go any more lyrics of that song.
That's fair.
Got it.
All right.
All right. Can I give a brief sidebar about one of the pieces of extended universe alien media that directly relates to aliens?
Absolutely.
Great. So there were a number of Audible dramas that were made in the Alien universe, and the second of those is called Alien Sea of Sorrows, and it is like a direct prequel to Aliens. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's really well done. It has like a full voice cast. I think there is a novel version of it as well, if that's more your thing. But like, I think they do a really excellent job. And what's really cool about it is that we get to see LV-426 really descend into hell, and just get destroyed over the course of it. And so like, what's going to happen, right? Like, but you get to see like what life was like on LV-426. And you get to see Newt's parents discover the eggs, and you get to see them tear themselves apart, in terms of like internal conflicts, trying to barricade themselves. Some of the scientists are trying to check out, how the aliens are working, and the facehugger stuff that then leads to Burke then getting to be a douche later and letting one of those face huggy boys out. Like you get to see all of that, and it also does kind of cut in some elements of Ripley's story, kind of leading up to it as well. Kind of what's going on with her, really just getting screwed over super hard by Weyland-Yutani, and how that's affecting her, and so it just kind of digs more into those kind of first 10 minutes of the movie, in terms of her story as well. But it's mostly focused on Newt, and some of the other people on LV-426, and and you get to see like how Newt manages to survive, and it's a lot of fun. So if you love aliens, Alien River of Pain is also a banger, and also like frankly all of those audio dramas that Audible has put out for Alien are all really good. There's another one that's actually like about Ripley shortly after Alien, which doesn't sound like it should be possible, but they actually make it work. That is really good. So anyway, they're worth your time if you've seen those and been like, I don't know, a lot of extended universe stuff for lots of things are terrible. This is not one of the terrible things. This is a lot of fun.
I'm gonna have to look that up. I've read. Have you seen Vasquez?
Yes. Yeah. I want to read the Vasquez book. I at StokerCon a couple years ago, I think it was, V. Castro, who wrote the Aliens Vasquez book, was talking about how she was writing a book about Vasquez, and I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds rad.
Yeah, it's pretty badass.
In the future, I'm going to just we'll just have to have an episode where I just froth at the mouth and talk about all of the extended universe alien stuff that I know, which is way too freaking much.
Deal.
I love that.
So how are you guys staying spooky these days?
Well, me and Audible have had a very intimate relationship the last month. I've gone through so many books. I listened to The Night Stalker by Philip Carlo, and The Night Stalker is probably the scariest serial killer for me. I don't know why. I don't like him. He's the worst. But then
Fair.
I read a book about the Hillside Stranglers, and they became the scariest serial killers. Also the worst. And now I'm about done with Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule, who was the best friend of Ted Bundy. And he might be the worst serial killer and scares me the most. So I've just been riding the serial killer true crime train.
Yeah, Stranger Beside Me was really interesting.
Yeah, I struggle sometimes because she's just so empathetic to Bundy's plight, and you're just like, but Anne, he's a murderer! And it's just fascinating how compartmentalized I think she had to get at some point.
Also, can we talk about how, I get it, objectively, he's a better looking serial killer compared to others, but, pluck your unibrow. Come on.
Okay, but for real, Ted. Ugh. Ugh, and he's the worst. The things he did in Florida, terrible. I mean, the things he did in the other 5 states, also terrible, but I think he just had nothing to lose in Florida.
Yeah, man, serial killers are the worst.
Yeah, rotten hell, guys, but not in the fun hell that we're going to. The bad hell. All right, no.
NJ, how are you staying spooky?
I have just recently finished a book called Always in This Nightmare by J.E. Erickson, and in it is a woman falls in love with her sleep paralysis demon named Mara, who is insanely hot. So I love that because it fulfills my horror/smut side. And then I did this just for Max. I watched the first episode of Has Been Hotel.
Thoughts? Do you love it?
I do. I think I have a crush on Charlie already.
Oh my god, yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, and I love the gratuitous cursing, so I'm going to continue.
So the next 2 episodes are a little slow, power through, but episode 4 through 10 is, you're going to cry, you're going to laugh, you're going to contemplate the afterlife and what it means, and I'm on my 4th watch. It's fine.
4th?
Yeah, I'm a little obsessed.
All right.
It's a
I don't think I've watched any TV show 4 times.
It's a musical and it's horror. It's basically made for me.
I mean, I've watched The Golden Girls 4 times.
I'm trying to think.
Anyway.
The only other...
I love the lack of response.
Yeah.
Nathaniel, how about you?
The biggest thing I'm doing to stay spooky right now is revising my novel. Super thrilled. I got an agent who has been giving me lots of wonderful feedback, but it means a lot of work.
Hey, congrats!
Yeah!
That's amazing!
Yeah, I'm super stoked, so hopefully this will, put things in motion very soon to get a book deal and maybe, get this book in front of some of you, dear listeners, because I think you might dig it. But yeah, so I've been already working my butt off on revising the book, but also have so much more work to do. I'm gonna just not want to look at a computer screen ever again after this month is over, but it's fine. But then the other thing I've been doing is I have gotten obsessed with this album, which is called the album.
That's too good.
Sorry.
by Joe Iconis and Family. So this was originally part of just the Joe Iconis and Family album, but then they took all of their spooky themed elements and released like a kind of a separate, like, shorter version that's just those. So the deal here is that Joe Iconis is like a he is a, like, writer of Broadway musicals. He did, like, the musical Be More Chill, but he also just likes to get together with, like, lots of his Broadway homies, and will just, like, release songs that, like, really aren't for any one specific musical, but definitely still have the vibes of being in a musical, essentially. And so in album, we have a few songs that are specifically kind of riffing off of different horror properties, but then we also have some that are just kind of his own, horror-y things. So the first song is called Haddonfield 15 Years Later for Judith, which is Michael Myers singing, essentially. And it's a banger. It's really good. It is wonderful because it's like incorporating all of these elements of the Halloween theme, and it's this kind of, like, it sounds like someone coming home in a Broadway musical, but it's Michael Myers coming home. So it's got this fun sinister edge to it. There's also one called Helen Sharp, which is from Death Becomes Her. There's The Nurse and the Addict, which is probably my favorite, which is a one for Misery.
Ooh.
And there's Lydia's song for Beetlejuice. There's Norman for Psycho. And then there's also just some other stuff, like there's a werewolf song called Run Away From You. There's a one called Sympathy for the Killer, from the perspective of someone who is a victim of some sort of serial killer. It's a lot of fun. If you like Broadway and you like horror, you will love this freaking album. So Joe Iconis and Family, definitely listen to it. They're all bangers, pretty much.
I have added it to my Spotify.
Yes,
Remind me what it was called again?
So it's album. So the letter A, and then in parentheses AAAGH exclamation point, close parentheses LBUM.
So I think
Perfect.
I just looked him up on Spotify, and he did the Be More Chill. Did you mention that?
Yep. Yes.
Be More Chill is amazing. Highly recommend.
Yep. Yeah, he did Be More Chill. He has done a couple other ones that they don't have albums for yet. Yeah, he's done 3 or 4 Broadway musicals, and also apparently just loves him some weird spooky stuff. So yeah, check it out.
With that, let's go find some facehuggers, NJ, and Nathaniel, you can come along.
I mean, NJ is horny for aliens.
And my wife is coming home soon, so haha.
Ooh!
Please don't listen to this, babe. I'm sorry.
But also, stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Stay spooky.